So at this point, I'd like to introduce our last speaker, Tara Townsend. So Tara is a senior customer experience designer at AARP. She's been practicing product design and experience design for the past decade. Actually, at AARP, she was part of a small team that sort of helped initially introduce human-centered design to the organization. And one fun fact about Tara is she's currently wrapping up her master's in behavioral economics. So it's very cool. So without further ado, Tara, I'll let you take it away.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. So thanks for letting me be here. I'm really excited. I have been a wannabe behavioral science nerd for a really long time and have only really recently gotten to make it official by being a part of this behavior design community. So thanks for welcoming me to your club. This is great. This track that we're part of is all about behavior design practices. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about how we at AARP use journey management to really activate behavior design in our Medicare education journey. So as most of you know, AARP is a mission-driven organization, a nonprofit. We're supported in large part by our membership base. We were founded in 1958 when Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus sought to secure health insurance plans for retired teachers. That campaign actually ended up leading to what is now called Medicare. And today, AARP's mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And our promise to consumers is that we will help them navigate the complexities of their life transitions, which a very complex one is Medicare, so that's included in there, so that they feel in control and confident and secure as they age. So, you know, supporting Medicare is truly foundational. I mean, it was the first thing that AARP did to our organization. It continues to be one of our core activities. Research has told us that AARP is one of the top 3 places where Medicare eligible Americans and those supporting them look for enrollment support.
Hey, Tara, if I could just interrupt you for a second. We're seeing your presenter view, so if you can just switch
Oh, you guys, now you secretly see all my notes. Give me 1 second to figure out if I am smart enough to do that. Hold on a second. So I was saying, you know, Medicare is hugely foundational to our organization. So as you can imagine, we are very interested in understanding the current state of Medicare access and kind of the process that people go through during enrollment. It's a massively important program. There's about 44 million Americans enrolled today, which is 15% of the population. And interestingly, 33% of Medicare recipients live near or below the poverty line. So that access and the simplicity of enrolling is really, really critical. Of course, it's not for any of you that know anything about Medicare who have looked at it to themselves or supported a family member in looking into Medicare. I'm sure what I'm about to share here is not going to be a surprise. So about 80% of seniors say that Medicare is too complex. 60% say that reviewing plans is at the very least unpleasant. 20% say it's downright awful. This leads to delayed enrollment. They're procrastinating this task because it's a terribly painful task. In 2017, more than 700,000 people paid late enrollment penalties, which was a 14% increase from 2013. And for those of you who know anything about Medicare, those enrollment fees are permanent. They are a permanent fee on annual premiums that exist for as long as you're enrolled in Medicare. Also, this leads to adverse plan choice. So when we're delaying, when we're procrastinating, we're not prepared to do a task. And so we're seeing a lot, really, really high out-of-pocket costs. The average Medicare recipient is paying more than $5,000 on healthcare costs, which is often up to 12% of their income. And as I mentioned, 33% are below the poverty line. So this is really an issue. And it also leads to less healthcare access. So 32% of US families, this is not just Medicare recipients, but more broadly, said that they have foregone medical care when the out-of-pocket costs were too high. So really, really bad outcomes related to the fact that this task is very complex, that there's this sense that it is too big and too scary, and people kind of put it off for a really long time. So we wanted to know how our own Medicare education enrollment support, our own support programs were either helping or not helping kind of some of these issues. And so in 2018, we tapped into our Voice of the Customer program, and what we saw was there were several consumer pain points related to our Medicare education support materials. And we realized that seniors, when, in these statistics that we were seeing about Medicare complexity, they were talking about us too. Like, our offerings in that space were also confusing.
So we jumped into consumer research, and we tried to figure out what was going on. What is causing this task delayment and these enrollment issues? So we know that this task is difficult, it's confusing, it's unpleasant, no one wants to do it. Everybody knows what that means. We are going to put it off. Procrastination, anyone who's looked at procrastination theory knows that task aversion is one of the primary drivers, and Medicare is the perfect case for that. So they're putting it off, or they're starting and they're abandoning it because it's so unpleasant. And that's leading to that late enrollment, which leads to those late enrollment penalties, or they're kind of waiting at the last minute. They're just choosing a plan totally unprepared and ending up with these plans that are not a good fit for their situation. And that leads to these really significant negative financial and health outcomes. So it sounds like a small thing, right? Procrastinating Medicare enrollment, but it really has these very significant outcomes. So how are we going to fix this? This is where we jumped into research that we've been doing, for about 2 years now. And we were asking ourselves, how can we break this cycle of events? How can we get in there and help kind of end that procrastination? So about a year of consumer research and prototyping, we saw some really clear and important insights. That folks don't know where to start. They think that they're supposed to start at just choosing a plan, just start shopping. They don't understand that there's this need for foundational knowledge. Again, they're having difficulty getting and staying motivated to do this difficult task. They're feeling really overwhelmed by the amount of information out there, by the jargon that's in it, that it's so complex and there's all these different parts and all these rules. And they're having a really difficult time staying engaged. They're visiting a page, they're learning a little bit, and then they're not coming back, and they're not ever really getting the full level of knowledge that's needed to make an informed decision. And of course, COVID, when we continued our research through COVID, and we had to pause in there and did some adjustments, but we got these kind of new trends coming out as we continued this research during COVID. There was suddenly this feeling of this need for guidance and support. There was, I hesitate to use this word, but a little bit of this want for hand-holding that we didn't see before. Before it was very much like, let me make my own decision, I got this, just give me some good resources. And now we were hearing more needing to get some reassurance and needing to be guided really through this process every step of the way. Folks were starting to get more comfortable in the digital space, and so they were being exposed to really excellent digital experiences, and there was this expectation that Medicare should be no different. If we were going to offer a digital tool, it better be good, it better be fast and simple and easy to navigate. And of course, no surprise here, health-related decisions in this last year felt incredibly high stakes. People were starting to see what it meant to be caught without good health insurance and have a real health crisis. And so suddenly this decision felt even bigger and scarier than it did before. So I know this session and this track is really about process. I just really quickly want to touch on some of the kind of behavioral takeaways. So don't know where to start. What do? We have to build cross-channel awareness, right? We have to let people know when that enrollment window is and make it clear to them what those enrollment penalties are. And we looked at framing this in different ways. And traditionally, a lot of resources use loss framing, which we know from behavioral science research is usually very powerful. But it wasn't working with this audience. An older audience doesn't respond to loss framing in the same way. They need something more positive and more supportive. And so the framing really has to be less about the penalties and more about what you get if you start early in this journey. We employed goal setting in our experience to really get around that motivation problem. We use the ARCS model for instructional design. We could have a whole nother presentation about what that looks like and how that looked in Medicare education, but it worked for this instance. We employed some personalized nudges to get past that kind of visiting, feeling overwhelmed, and then disappearing. We used the goals that individuals set as reminders to bring them back. Hey, you said you wanted to do this. Here's a little nudge to come back to us. Tone choice was really critical. We spent a lot of time thinking about our word choice and the environment in which we were speaking with individuals. And finally, We learned a lot about natural mapping and affordances in UX design to really drive home that ease of use. So all of these could be a whole nother conversation about behavior design, but what I want to talk about today is the process that we leveraged in order to make these a reality. So at a high level, what we're saying here is the Medicare journey needs behavioral design to be more effective. Behavioral design really requires a channelless experience. You have to be able to impact in over time, consistently, many touch points across many channels and many interactions with the user. And a channelless journey, a truly channelless journey, can only be achieved through journey management. So now we're really going to get into what this process and this practice is all about. So journey management, the way we talk about it at our organization, and to simplify it, is it's a new way of working internally to better meet consumer needs. It enables the delivery of personalized, seamless experiences across digital and physical channels, which includes kind of this behavior design approach that we were trying to employ with Medicare. It requires this whole new management philosophy that really ignores channels and product lines, which is how our organization is currently aligned. I'm sure many of your organizations are similar. And it starts to manage experiences instead as end-to-end journeys. And those journeys are really defined by the consumer. They're not our journeys internally. We didn't make those up based on how we are organized and how it's easy for us to kind of organize teams, but we ask the consumer, where does this journey begin and end for you? And that's how we organize ourselves internally. It's an entirely new discipline, really, that it's rooted in CX best practices and consumer centricity and human-centered design. It has to align with, it has to allow consumer experience initiatives to align directly with consumer outcomes. So we're not creating, in this new discipline, new consumer experiences to drive business outputs or business objectives. We get there eventually, but the way that we're defining success for these consumer experiences is consumer outcomes. And that's really, really critical. And part of the discipline is really considering the impact for consumers when prioritizing our investments. And all of this has to be supported by a really, really robust set of capabilities that's in people and their skill sets. It's in tools. It's in data, tons and tons of lots of gaps that most organizations have that we're all still tackling too. So this is a lot. I don't want to go through this in too much detail, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys a picture of what that all means in terms of the requirements for an organization to be able to adopt journey management. You need real-time access to centralized data. That's going to be really key for that continuous cross-channel experience. You need experienced CX people in your organization to support and execute this. You need processes that can efficiently get solutions out the door. You have to be able to enable these things that you're designing. You need a culture that has fully adopted a consumer-centric philosophy, and then you need the governance behind that to really activate that culture within the way that you manage your business. You need a process to get value to market quickly. You need to be able to measure consumer value and consumer outcomes. And that's really key. You need to have a robust set of CX metrics that you and your organization are comfortable with measuring in order to make sure that your these journeys that you are designing are being defined by and measured by consumer outcomes. And ideally, those things ladder up to business value, but we shouldn't be defining our journeys based on business value. Agility is really key, especially testing agility, get things, prototypes, MVPs, whatever you can out the door to get some learnings quickly. On the organizational alignment side, you got to have a compelling purpose. Why are we doing this at this organization? What's it going to do for us? For us, we talked about that. Internal wins, it's going to make us more efficient. We're going to get value to market quicker. But we also talked about it in consumer terms. We're going to see bigger outcomes, not just with Medicare, but in some of our other social mission spaces too. Stakeholder engagement, stakeholder buy-in, that's key in any change management. Here, it's really critical for them to support this shift in authority. So the decision authority is really moving from these channel managers or product managers into these journey managers. And those could be the same individuals, right? Your product manager could become a journey manager or a channel manager. That's not as important as just making sure that the person that is kind of leading the vision and has decision authority has purview over the end-to-end journey. You need active support. Again, this gets back to that robust set of capabilities, both knowledge and tools and resources. And it really helps to kind of give your organization a heads up on what's coming in terms of changes. And we built out a high-level roadmap to communicate that. So that's a lot to do. So I'm just going to share like a couple key places how we got started in implementing journey management. There's the operating model, which is kind of that shift away from managing to products or managing to channels to managing to journeys. So what does that look like? We aligned behind a journey vision. So that's all about defining what success looks like for a journey. I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. I'm going to do a very light touch on journey data and technology enablement. And something that I think is really critical is how you're going to measure value and how you're going to measure success when you're managing to journeys. So here's a picture of our operating model. I want to focus first in the center line where you see Medicare, Journey 2, Journey 3. This is the core of this operating model. This is where the cross-functional teams that own and have purview over and manage those end-to-end journeys sit. They are responsible for the success of the journey. And I think this is a little bit like a product owner or a product manager and their team, in that the journey lead should be an expert in the journey. They are the ones that are like very intimately close to the data and the research. They know who the personas are inside and out. They're leading the defining of the journey vision and of journey success, and they're supported by a deep cross-functional journey team. These are where you're pulling in all the experts from products and channels. And they're supporting and aligning behind the journey vision that they define together with the journey lead. So you can see in our organization, we're testing a number of these. Medicare is just one of them. I sit on AARPX, and that is our experience team within AARP. And it doesn't matter if this is a business unit or just a number of individuals, but there has to be a support system for these journey leads. Often, your journey lead is going to be an expert in the experience. Maybe they're a Medicare expert, but they're not an experience design expert. They're not a behavioral design expert. They might not even be a CX expert. And so they really need a support system to help them adopt practices that keep them consumer-centric, that help them understand how to measure consumer value, that help them understand how to adopt behavior design practices, et cetera. And that's what we do on AARPX. We talk a little bit about executive sponsorship. Super, super critical that they're read in, not only to the process, but to each of the visions that are eventually established for these journeys, so that as we're asking the organization to align priorities behind those visions, you have a team that's fully on board. Which gets me to the journey vision. So the journey vision, we built this beautiful document in Miro. It's an activity that's really not just about the document, but about all of the work that goes into it, because it's this collaborative effort between the journey lead and this 8-member journey, cross-functional journey team that's coming from all parts of the organization to define success for this journey. So it establishes the scope. The scope is in terms of the consumer. It's not, it starts with this touch point and ends with this touch point. It's for Medicare, it begins when I either become aware of or want to become aware of Medicare, my Medicare situation, my Medicare enrollment, and it ends when I feel confident and ready to enroll in a Medicare plan. So that could begin and end in a number of places in terms of channels and touch points, but we wanted to make sure that we were defining the scope in terms of the consumer. It defines journey success. So in this case, you'll be interested to hear this definition of journey success. We'll revisit this, but we define journey success as informed peace of mind, which means that at the end of our journey, the consumer is fully informed, and we can measure that through quizzes and other ways about the foundational Medicare knowledge, and they feel confident, they feel at peace about the decision that they have made in moving forward. It also ideally defines what business objectives are being supported by improving this journey. So again, you're still defining success in consumer terms. Success is defined by informed peace of mind. But when we deliver that to our consumers, when they have informed peace of mind and they're making better choices, what does that do for AARP? So you want to try to tie it to those business objectives as best possible. The journey vision identifies key segments and personas going through the journey. What are their specific consumer needs, and what design criteria should we all be adopting to support those consumer needs? It also captures the current state. This is a whole nother effort that could go over 2 weeks. That's part of the journey vision that asks, what are we doing in this space today? Where are our pain points? Where are we doing well? Where is the if we don't have a defined journey today, where are we seeing one maybe naturally come out? If you have a journey analytics tool, you can use that. If you can also use journey mapping, but you want to get some picture of kind of what exists today, because you'll see by comparing the current state to what we defined as journey success, you see the kind of delta, you see the gap between where you are today and where you want to go. And that's your opportunities. Those are the gaps you have to close to get to your ideal journey vision. I said I touch really at a high level on data and technology enablement. I just want to talk a little bit about a process that we did. So after we went through that whole vision exercise and we had this set of opportunities, we kind of created these concept sheets. We had about 20 big opportunities, and we developed these 2-page concept sheets that were really kind of detailed user stories. And we shared those with our data and technology teams so they could start thinking about what journey management what we need in the organization to truly enable end-to-end journey management. And together we built a roadmap for establishing a data technology architecture which would support journey management. So again, there's a lot we could talk about here in terms of what's the data that's needed and what technologies are we adopting. But I think what's really critical is just really, really early, when this stuff is still all just conceptual, share that with your data teams so they can start planning in advance, because some of the needs for journey management are very different than the needs for managing experiences in other ways. And so they need planning time. Finally, value measurement. This for me is one of the most critical pieces. Journey management will not be successful unless you have a very clear definition of what success looks like for each journey. And journey management isn't doing its job if the journey success isn't defined in consumer terms. So that's where we come up with something silly sounding like informed peace of mind. That's because consumers told us that's what they want at the end of our experience with us. They don't want us to hand them a plan. They don't feel like AARP's job is to hand deliver them a recommendation, or that they don't assume that they're going to sign up through us, but they want to walk away from their education experience with us feeling like a savvy shopper, feeling very informed, and feeling confident that they are ready to make a decision. So operationalizing something like informed peace of mind is incredibly difficult. It requires partnership with data and research. It often requires qualitative data. You might have to send a survey out at the end of a new journey that you're testing in market. If you have a voice of the customer program, that's certainly something you're going to want to connect with something like this, because we're not just going to be able to see it in behavior. We also have to make sure that we're listening to the perceptions of people as they're exiting the journey. So that's really critical in operationalizing journey success. And then in order to continue to build buy-in, we have to connect that to business objectives. So for example, I'm sure many of you at organizations that measure things like NPS or customer sat have a relatively good idea of how those metrics impact revenue or retention in your organization. But how do you explain how informed peace of mind impacts revenue and retention? So it's a little bit of a long pull. It's something that you have to start with just measuring the CX metric, but kind of quickly you want to be partnering with data folks to try to understand how success in the journey is impacting business success. Definitely, you're going to need to define a dashboard for journey measurement. Our dashboard is very robust, what we're working towards anyway. It includes all the critical touch points within the journey. It shows performance at the touch point level. And then it shows how performance at the touch point level impacts journey success. And it starts to reveal the levers in the journey that you can pull to help better drive journey success. So for example, you might find that there is a specific learning module in Medicare education that is extremely critical to the overall knowledge at the end of the program as compared to some of the other modules. And you'll want, once you see that in your dashboard, once you see that connection, you'll want to make sure that you're getting that one right, that you're knocking out all the pain points there, and that you're making sure that the throughput and that touch point is really solid. So this is our journey management journey at AARP. This is extremely high level, but it gives you an idea of kind of the process you can take to measure a journey. You don't have to have that whole, or to manage 2 journeys. You don't have to have that whole operating model necessarily. If this is just something that you as a product owner or as an experience owner, or perhaps there's a journey that sits fully in your purview already, it doesn't require kind of this reorganization. This is a process that you can follow. So the first part of this process is defining the journey. That's where we talked about the scope. Make sure that the scope is defined in terms of how consumers are thinking their journey begins and ends, and then kind of box that in. Okay, this is where I'm focusing. You want to onboard your team, whoever that is. Ideally, the journey lead is someone that has some pretty deep knowledge in the experience that you're managing, and the journey team is a cross-functional team that supports the critical parts of that journey. So if your journey is highly digital, you want to make sure that you have members on your journey team from your web space, from your email space, SMS, etc. Together, you will define the journey vision. We can have a whole other conversation about what that journey vision could look like, but the critical role of the journey vision is to align the journey team and to align the organization, because ideally the journey vision sets the priorities for any touch point, any interaction, any effort that is part of that journey. So, even if you sit on the digital team, if someone in retail is working on a totally different project, but that still touches the journey, you want to have a conversation with them about perhaps reprioritizing and why. And you should have in your journey vision the data to support that. Like, this is what we learned in consumer research. These are the critical needs. And so let's have a conversation about working together to support those. And the journey vision should help you do that work and have those conversations. Understanding the current state is a big undertaking. Journey mapping is really useful here if you don't have a journey analytics tool currently. Voice of the customer is really, really useful here for uncovering pain points, but try to get a picture of where you are today and really where your biggest opportunities are, or in other words, where your biggest pain points are. And then you can identify those opportunities and prioritize those. And our prioritization model, again, is driven by consumer impact. Which opportunities will help get our consumers to their ideal outcomes the quickest? And that's one of our primary factors in prioritization. Of course, there's other factors in there too, like feasibility and cost, but that's really where we start. And once we have that prioritized list, we can define a roadmap, and the journey lead owns and manages the roadmap, but their job is to socialize that more broadly with the organization and make sure they have buy-in and support from all the individuals that have to execute on that roadmap. And then you go into a pretty familiar cycle after that of testing. So you're defining your test plans for these optimizations. You're enabling your journey team to run with those tests and operationalize them. The journey lead should not be weighed down by having to do all of that. And then you're launching and measuring and analyzing, and you're definitely going back to your vision with any new learnings. So if in testing you learned, this design criteria that we thought was really critical isn't that critical, let's update our vision. Or this persona is behaving in a much different way than we expected, let's revisit that in the journey vision. You want to make sure that that's a living document that you're always going back to. So this journey management approach is critical before COVID, but I think is very critical in post-COVID. We know that the shift to digital experiences and relationships in the health space is probably to some degree permanent. And so we have to make sure that we are delivering connected emotional experiences in non-person spaces. So in our digital spaces, on the phone, in direct mail. Our users in the health space should feel like they know us. That trust is super, super critical here, especially with something like Medicare. And the only way to achieve that is to consistently show up and keep interactions connected no matter where we are. So in other words, we have to be channelless. And the way that we can be channelless is to manage to end-to-end journeys and stop managing to channels, stop managing to product lines, and think about managing in the way that consumers see experiences and not the way that we see experiences internally. So with that, in closing, I just want to share some high-level key enablers. If you're going to take something like this on, get buy-in for your operating model, whatever your operating model looks like. Specifically, you want to get buy-in for decision authority. You want to sell the idea that you're going to create a research and data-driven vision for the journey, a vision for success, and you want to get buy-in from leadership that they will align behind that, as long as they agree with that vision, that they will align behind it and they will help their teams align behind that vision too. Socialize the journey, vision far and wide, because how can people align behind a vision if they don't know what it is? Create something like a placemat that's really beautiful that everybody wants to look at, and what you're really driving home here is journey success is this consumer outcome. It's not revenue generation, it's not NPS, it's this specific consumer outcome, and that will impact NPS and revenue generation in these ways, but let's focus on making this happen, whatever it is for our consumers. Enable your journey team members to run with it. They have to feel supported by the journey lead and whoever in your organization can support CX functions. They have to feel resourced, and if you can do that for them and make sure they're comfortable with the journey vision and they feel ownership of that vision, they'll do a lot of the legwork. And finally, that journey lead needs lots of time and training and support. Like I said, think of them as like a project or a product owner or a product manager, and that they have to be an expert in this space. And then you're also asking them to be an expert really in CX practices. So there's a lot to learn, and you just want to make sure that you have someone or a team or an individual in your organization that can give them day-to-day support. And that's all I have. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to share this with you guys, and I'll open it up to any questions if anybody has anything.
Thanks, Tara. This was awesome. Really glad you persisted through those tech issues. I think the content was really, really great.
Sorry about that.
A lot of comments on the threads here. I'll read a couple comments off, and then I want to give people a chance to go to the next session, which is at 4:10. But yeah, so one question is, how do you translate something as inspirational but also potentially abstract as informed peace of mind into a success metric, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's something that we're still tackling. It kind of is a mishmash of lots of different metrics. The informed part we're tackling through two proxies. One is, did the person complete the journey? And did they do it, like we're trying to put a time frame around it. If you do it in X number of days, then you probably did it with confidence. And then there's a little knowledge test at the end that is optional. But that knowledge quiz is also a way of defining informed. And then peace of mind, right now, we are primarily using a survey that comes at the end of the experience. And we're lucky that this experience is so involved that people don't mind doing a 2-question survey at the end. So we're able to measure something like informed peace of mind. But what we're trying to do is look at the people that have high scores on decision confidence and peace of mind, and then look at their behavior and see if we can find behavioral proxies for that mindset, so that we don't have to continuously survey and ask our members to be doing one more thing. We can correlate peace of mind with a behavior, and then we can look for that behavior in our data.
Great, super helpful. Another question here is, how often do you bring customers into this process, and at what stages?
Oh my gosh, all the time. from day one. I mean, we start with like, what is Medicare to you? Like we had, we just started with in-depth individual interviews, and we're just asking about, tell me about your Medicare process so far. Where are you going? What are you doing? What resources have you been using? How does it feel? Where do you think there's gaps? Just really, really broad. And then from there, we went back with conceptual stuff, super high level prototypes kind of stuff. And we were asking, does this resonate with you? Does this feel like it would be a need? Like, is a workbook a need? Is it okay if it's totally digital? Do you need something to talk to on the phone? So super conceptual. And then from there, we started building prototypes. And at first, they're really, really scrappy. And we're showing them again to people one-to-one in face-to-face consumer research or virtual consumer research. And eventually, we're building a small prototype that we can launch on a small scale in market and getting feedback that way. But what we've done is we've integrated things like diary tools. We have micro interviews where we call people even after. So we just like embed qualitative research opportunities, even when we're in an in-market testing scenario, so that we are constantly getting both behavioral feedback from like the tracking, but also direct qualitative feedback from our consumers.
Great. One last question here. Does journey management complement direct channel management or replace it?
Oh, that's such a good question. I will tell you from the perspective of my leadership in my organization, it does not replace it. And I agree with that. I mean, we're a huge organization. We are not going to manage every single experience as an end-to-end journey. And not every single experience needs to be managed as an end-to-end journey. I think really it's the experiences in your organization that have outcomes that are really critical either for your business or for your consumers. Those should be managed as journeys. So I think you can have both, but I think where a journey and a channel overlap or a journey and a product overlap, the journey really should take precedence because the journey is focused on serving the consumer. And ideally, if the channel is serving a touch point within that journey, then it is aligning to drive success as the journey has defined it.
Great, that's super helpful. Well, awesome, Tara. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation and for the folks who had joined this track. I hope you all found it valuable and inspiring as much as I did. So awesome. Thank you, everybody. And just a reminder that there's a networking, maybe you'll be able to get a brief minute in, but then our next session starts at 4:10 with Dustin and in the main room. So thank you, everybody. Take care and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys.